Okay.
So
Uh,
I'll go first. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our group debate for CLO 7. Our topic today is: should the government intervene in pricing strategies such as rent control and minimum wage hikes? I'm Akshay, playing the role of a policymaker, joined by Nishit, an economist, and Aishwarya, a business executive. We will each present a perspective supported by economic theory, real world data, and practical considerations. So let's dive in. So, as a policymaker, my responsibility is to balance economic growth with social equity. Market outcomes aren't always fair, particularly for low income individuals facing rising housing costs or stagnant wages. Uh, let's consider an example. Consider the federal minimum wage in the US, which has remained $7.25 since 2009. Meanwhile, the cost of living has surged, especially in urban centers. A 2022 report by the Economic Policy Institute shows that a full time worker on minimum wage cannot afford a one bedroom apartment in any state in the US. Wage, wage stagnation is a systemic failure, not a market correction. That's where the policy comes in. So now let's talk rent control. Opponents argue it reduces supply, but without intervention, rents in cities like Los Angeles or New York would make it impossible for essential workers to live near their jobs. Rent control doesn't have to mean freezing rents. Instead, limiting annual increases and offering tenant protections ensures housing affordability without completely distorting the market. Rather than choosing between intervention and non-intervention, we need smart regulation, minimum wage increase that reflect local cost of living, and stabilization policies that prevent eviction while still allowing landlords a fair return. Over to you, Nishat.
yeah, thanks, Akshay. So, from an economic standpoint, a government intervention is a double-edged sword, right? So, it can protect vulnerable groups that can also create a market inefficiency if poorly implemented. Like a price floors, like a minimum wage above equilibrium can lead to a surpluses. In this case, unemployment. So, firm might hire a fewer workers or substitute a labor with automation like price ceilings such as rent control or create shortages. Landlord might remove properties from the rental market or neglect the maintenance. However, in practice, we don't see catastrophic job loss from modest wage increases. University of California Berkeley study shows that raising a minimum wage in a city like San Jose and Seattle did not significantly affect the employment, but it did raise the earnings and reduce the employee turnover. So rent control has a mixed result. Strict controls can reduce the housing clock, but moderate rent stabilization can provide a tenant a security while keeping the rental market active. For example, in Oregon 2019 rent control law, which capped the annual rent increase at 7% plus inflation, was designed to prevent the exploitative rent hikes while still allowing landlords a profit. So, in closing, like intervention is not inherently flawed. It becomes a flawed when it is one size fits all. The right approach over here is the data informed and flexible and the local.
Okay, thank you, Nishit. And as someone representing the business world, I must stress the practical challenges that government imposed pricing creates. The first one is minimum wage challenges. So, raising the minimum wage increases labor costs. For small businesses, especially in retail or food services, this can be the difference between staying afloat and shutting down. In New York City, some restaurants had to cut staff and reduce hours after the minimum wage hike in 2019, as reported by the New York City Hospitality Alliance. Now, as for rent control, it discourages property development. If investors can't earn competitive returns, they take their capital elsewhere. San Francisco saw a 15% reduction in rental housing supply after expanding rent control in the 1990s. And when supply falls, the unintended result is higher market rents for non controlled units. Now, instead of price mandates, consider earned income tax credit to boost low income wages, zoning reforms to allow more housing construction, training programs to upskill low wage workers, and these address root cause root causes without distorting prices. The market responds to incentives rather than imposing limits. Government should enable solutions that improve affordability without penalizing businesses or landlords.
Yeah, Aishwarya, but your concerns are valid, but isn't it unfair to rely on EITC when taxpayers have to, subsidize companies that won't pay living wages?
Yes, I mean that's one perspective, but EITC is targeted and businesses can adjust gradually. Mandating sudden wage hikes can result in job losses, which hurt workers even more.
Yeah, so you are both making good points. Perhaps like a hybrid policy is the best. A gradual minimum wage increase paired with tax incentives for a small business and housing developers.
Exactly, and rent control should sunset or apply only during crisis, not as permanent market distortion.
Agreed. Like flexibility is key. Government should monitor outcomes and recalibrate based on market signals. I think we should extend our debate. Like we should, talk about different segments. Like about the government pricing interventions. Segment one could be, which I can think about, is on the purpose of government intervention. Like when people working 40 plus hours a week can't afford rent or food, that's not a free market working well, right? That's market failure. Minimum wage laws and rent caps are tools to protect citizens.
But what happens when those tools hurt the people you are trying to help? If businesses cannot afford the new wage, they automate jobs or shut down. Isn't that also a failure?
Both points are valid. That's why the economists talk about a second best solution. Like if a markets are already imperfect, thoughtful regulations can improve the outcomes, just not with a blanket mandates.
Yeah, and like on the second part, right, like on the wage increases versus the employment laws, like do you guys think raising the minimum wage doesn't necessarily mean job loss? The Congressional Budget Office found in 2021 that while there might be some reduction, the net benefit in poverty reduction outweighs that.
But that assumes one size fits all. So, what's sustainable in New York may crush a business in rural Alabama, for example. So, why not let states or countries set their own levels?
Exactly the point. So regional indexing is a compromise. So some states already use a cost of living indices to set the wages dynamically. So it's a smart economic.
And what about the rent control trade-offs? Like without some form of rent regulation, gentrification drives out working families. And look at San Francisco, guys. People with full-time jobs living in cars.
Yeah, and yet rent control has discouraged new housing construction there for like decades. Developers pull out when they can't get returns, and that worsens the crisis.
So that's why economist supports inclusionary zoning and time bond rent caps. For instance, like allow rent control during rapid inflations, but phase it out as the market stabilizes.
Yeah, and now if we talk about market incentives versus government mandates, now government should incentivize behavior, not dictate it. Offer tax credits for affordable housing construction and reward businesses that pay well. Don't impose blanket ceilings or floors.
But when left to their own devices, many businesses don't act in the public interest. Like, should we just hope the market does the right thing while people suffer?
Markets are driven by profit, not ethics. So that's why regulatory nudges like opt-in retirement savings or housing vouchers strike a good balance between the freedom and fairness over here.
Yeah, I think we should talk. We should put some points on the philosophical aspect as well, right? Like we legislate to reflect values, dignity, opportunity, fairness. Price intervention isn't just about numbers; it's about people.
Yeah, but people also need jobs, stable supply chains, and innovation. So, too much control strangles the very economy that's supposed to uplift them.
Um, I guess the truth lies in the middle. Government should intervene where market outcomes are unjust or unstable, but it must do so wisely with economic insight and adaptive policies. So let's move to the next segment, like talking about on historical outcomes of price intervention. So we have seen this debate play out before. In 1970, U.S. imposed a widespread wage and price control under Nixon to fight inflation. Now it backfired, leading to shortages and economic distortions.
Yeah, that's true. But as you know, it was a blanket. Rational policy during stagflation. What we are talking about today is more targeted, like tying rent hikes to CPI or setting specific region-specific wage floors.
Still, when the government steps in, the market shifts. In Argentina, rent controls led to a black market for rentals. People paid under the table just to get access. Isn't that proof that price controls often push problems underground?
Yes, but context matter. Now, in Sweden, rent regulations work better because it's paired with social housing programs. Now, intervention alone isn't enough. It needs to be a part of a coordinated system.
Okay, now let's now going on to the next segment on wage hikes and inflation. When wages go up across the board, costs go up too. It creates a ripple effect. Suddenly, groceries cost more, services cost more, and that fuels inflation. And that hurts the very workers we are trying to help.
Yeah, but actually, like inflation isn't caused solely by wage growth. According to the Federal Reserve, most recent inflation has been supply chain driven. In fact, putting more money in workers' hands can stimulate demand and speed up recovery.
Exactly. So the marginal propensity to consume is higher in low income earners. Now, that means if you pay them more, they will spend more. Boosting local economies and the small businesses is a key over here.
Yeah, as we talked about this wage hikes, inflation, and all, we should also think about ethical versus economic debate. Like, we must also ask what kind of society do we want? One where profit matters more than people, or one where we ensure basic dignity? That no one works full time. Uh, I mean, full time lives in poverty.
So, of course, dignity matters, but small businesses aren't villains. They are job creators. So, if you burden them too much, they can't survive, and that hurts the communities in return.
This is a, a classic equity versus efficiency trade-off. Now, the role of modern economics is to find optimal policies that enhances both, not sacrifice one for the other over here.
Yeah, like what about we think about like solutions instead of sides, right? Like we should not take any side. We should think about solutions. What if we took a middle path, right? Raise the minimum wage gradually and offer wage subsidies or tax relief to a small business during the transition.
And in housing, instead of strict rent control, offer rent vouchers or tax breaks or for affordable housing units so that it keeps developers interested and renters protected.
These are a great ideas. In fact, economists call this a market compatible interventions. Now you are using the incentives to shape the outcomes, not forcing the market unnaturally over here.
Yeah, that's correct. And we shouldn't be afraid to act. Inaction is a decision too. If we don't intervene at all, we normalize inequality.
But actions must be responsible. Interventions must be time bound, data driven, and flexible. Otherwise, we are just risking a permanent harm.
And we must monitor every policy for unintended consequences. Now, the best economic system are adaptive, not rigid. Now, talking about like a intervention and the labor market dynamics over here, let's not forget the labor market isn't perfectly competitive. Now, employees often have more power, especially in a low skill sectors. That's called the monospony monopsony power. In those cases, minimum wages can actually improve both wages and employment over here.
Exactly. If big corporations like Amazon or Walmart are the only game in town, they set the terms. Without wage floors, workers have no bargaining power.
So I agree that monopsony exists in some places, but there is another risk, that is wage compression. If we raise entry level pay without adjusting mid level salaries, we demotivate skilled workers and destabilize internal equity.
Good point. So that's why a tiered wage structure might help. You can raise a lower rate tier wages while proportionally adjusting the others.
We should also think about generational impact of housing policy. Rent control isn't just about today, it's about the future. When young people can't afford rent, they delay starting families, buying homes, or saving for retirement. That hurts economy growth long term.
But if we freeze or cap rents too aggressively, we discourage real estate investment. That reduces new housing supply, driving up uncontrolled market rents even more.
Right. So, which is why economists recommend mixed strategies, combine modest rent control with incentives for developers, like a faster permitting or density bounces for affordable housings. So, let's add to here like a behavioral economics perspective. Now, behavioral economics also play a role over here, like tenants facing constant rent uncertainty experience high stress that reduce productivity and well-being. Now, stable rent can improve social cohesion and workforce stability.
Yeah, that's an underrated point. Housing insecurity creates ripple effects on education, health, and even crime rates. Price intervention may be imperfect, but so is doing nothing.
And yet, behavioral bias applies to landlords too. If they perceive the market as hostile, they pull out of it, and even if controls are mild. So, government messaging and transparency clearly matter here.
So, talking about now global comparison and the lessons over here, let's compare globally. In Germany, nationwide rent regulation has been more successful due to a high rental housing supply and strong tenant laws. But in India, old rent control laws led to a property decay and a landlord tenant disputes.
Yeah, I agree to your point, but in India, the supply is less. In Germany, there can be a supply, there can be a strong supply, but in India, the supply is less. So the lesson is policy design matters more than ideology. Rent control can work, but only in the right legal, cultural, and economic environment.
And Singapore, for instance, solved housing issues not through control but by mass government housing construction. Maybe intervention should focus on supply, not just price.
Yeah, and during crises like COVID-19 or house, housing market bubbles, temporary price interventions can act as a safety net. For example, eviction protected families during the pandemic.
Yeah, but temporary is the key word. Some emergency measures have turned semi permanent, which discourages economic recovery. We must sunset these policies or make them automatically reversible.
Yeah, it's a great solution is to use the triggers like a price caps that automatically activate during the inflation surges or job losses and deactivate once the economy stabilizes.
I stand by this. Like the government's job is not to control every price, but to ensure no one is left behind by the market.
Yeah, and I believe a thriving private sector is the best poverty alleviation tool. Let's build a supportive policy climate, not the one that is a punishable.
And I believe like we can reconcile both, intervene where needed, monitor outcomes, and adjust based on the evidence. Let economics guide empathy over here. So to conclude, the debate isn't about whether government should intervene, but how and when. Minimum wage hikes and rent control, when thoughtfully designed, can promote equity. Uh, without crushing the growth. Now, but rigid policy can backfire. A balanced approach informed by data grounded in economic reality and aligned with the local needs offer a best path forward. Thank you.